One of the most important theories of the origin of the state is the social contract theory. It is a theory which originated from the liberal point of view. It treats the state as a product of mutual agreement of men. In fact, this is a theory which is grounded in liberal perspective, and it treats individual as rational human being possessing free will and all the natural rights available to man given by the nature. According to this theory, the state is created with a definite purpose, to serve certain social needs. We know that this theory originated from the mechanistic concept of the state, and we need to remember that the mechanistic concept treats the state as an artificial device. It postulates deliberate effort behind the formation of the state. So, according to this theory, state is not a natural institution, but it is an artificial device or instrument of all individuals, or an instrument invented by man for their mutual benefit. According to this theory, the state is intended to serve the interests of all individuals or all sections of society. And that's why it is the product of the will of society. It is not given to man by some divine power. It's not coming to a human being as some sort of gift from the God. Human being is inventing this political institution to serve their own purposes. That's why it is nothing but an expression of common will. Other things associated with this social contract theory of the origin of the state, what it assumes, why the state exists, how a state came into being. The social contract theory of the origin of the state assumes three important elements of this entire assumption. One is state of nature, then the nature of contract, and finally what this contract is giving rise to, that is the character of sovereignty. Now, general understanding of a state of nature is that there was a time, and we need to remember one thing here, that social contract theorists do not tell us that there was a historical time, chronologically. In fact, they are just assuming that what would be man's life without political institutions or without the state. So they assume that this kind of existence will be called as the state of nature. And they assume that the time when man lived or would have lived without any recognized civil law or without the state, that state of existence, these theorists call the state of nature. Now, the second element of this theory is contract. And contract is what generally it is understood as a mutual agreement between two or more individuals. So social contract theorists believe that the state was created through the voluntary agreement of all individuals who constitute the state. The third element is the character of sovereignty. In fact, the three most important advocates of social contract theories, namely Hobbes, Locke, and Rousseau, have drawn different pictures of the state of nature, terms of the contract, and the character of sovereignty, which came into existence as a consequence of the birth of the state. Now, what is general understanding of the state of nature according to social contract theorists? This is the state which denotes how man lived, as we just recalled now, or how he would have lived without the authority of civil law, state, or political control. Since there wasn't any state, there wasn't any law, so at this stage there is no industry, no systematic production either. Man lives not only close to nature, they have to depend on the inner impulses, unrestrained by civil law, although a natural law is supposed to have existed. Now, at this stage, men have no recognized rights, although they enjoy some natural rights. We know that the main exponents of this theory include Hobbes, Locke, and Rousseau. Now, apart from these thinkers, some are later thinkers who made use of this theory to elaborate their own systems of thought, and these include Immanuel Kant, Herbert Spencer, John Rawls, and of course Robert Nozick. Now let's come back to Hobbes. How Hobbes is telling us the story of the origin of the state through his idea of social contract theory. To say, now before we get into his theory of social contract, let's look at his life. Who was he? Hobbes was a tutor to Charles II of England. We need to remember, just for the sake of information, he sought to justify the absolute power of sovereign in his famous work, Leviathan, which he wrote in 1651. Hobbes also condemned the Civil War of 1642 because he found it as one of the forces of disintegration. He tried to establish the absolute sovereignty of the state as an essential condition of social solidarity. In fact, his political philosophy, which he demonstrated in the Leviathan in 1651, was nothing but a reflection of the civil strife in England, which was followed by the execution of Charles I. So what was his paramount consideration? Or to say, what was the most important goal Hobbes had in his mind? It was order in society, which emanated largely from two happenings in his life. One was the fear of violent death, and other one was the need for all the contentments of life. These two unrelated incidents in his life help us to understand what was Hobbesian political philosophy. One practical incident was the fear of Spanish Armada, which stimulated his mother's labor, and Hobbes was born prematurely. It's a historical fact. What we learn from the stories about his life. Second was the outbreak of the English Civil War in 1641, and the fact that Hobbes was the first to flee from England. When he was recounting all these things at the age of 84, while looking back on his life, he felt that it was fear which held the key. And he observed that fear and I were born twins, which summarizes his political philosophy. So therefore one can say that fear was the basis of his political philosophy, which led him to argue for a case in favor of despotism. In fact, he regarded self-preservation as a supreme right. Uh, this notion of self-preservation as a supreme right he borrowed from Grotius, who believed that all individuals had a right to preserve themselves and that other things being equal, if all other things are equal, then no one could ever be blamed for doing what they did in order to survive. So I cannot be blamed if I'm doing something which is good for my survival, if all other things are equal. So this is his political assumption, philosophical assumption. Now Hobbes was born on April 5th, 1588. He was second son. His birth was premature, as we just said. His parents were relatively poor. His father was a member of clergy, and he was brought up by his uncle. In his younger days, he was a brilliant student, mastered a number of languages. He could speak and read Latin, Greek, French, Italian, and English. When he was in his school, during his school days, he translated many works of Latin into Greek. In fact, his first publication was a translation of History of Peloponnesian War in 1629. Just before he died at the age of 86, he translated Homer's Odyssey, very famous classic work. He was a good writer, we all know. So this is his personal life story. When he published his Leviathan, his relationship with Charles II was not good. It led to his estrangement with Charles II. After so many things going around in his life, when he returned to England and submitted to the Republican government under Oliver Cromwell, he received pension from Charles II. And in 1655, he published De Corpore. In 1657, what happened to Leviathan? We know the story that the Leviathan was reported to the parliamentary committee as a most poisonous piece of atheism. In 1670, Hobbes publishes Behemoth. But in 1683, Leviathan and the Deceive were condemned and burned at Oxford University. So this was the hatred regarding his publication. He was not a very popular, people-favored, or to say people-friendly writer. He was writing which was not liked by most of the people belonging to political class or the ruling class. He served the Cavendish family faithfully for more than 4 generations, and in his old age, of course, he was treated more than as a servant, but he could not get that respect of honored guest. In October 1679, he fell ill and finally died of paralysis on December 3rd. So this is his life story. Now, Hobbes was influenced by the developments in science of his age. He was philosophically and methodologically influenced by new developments in the physical sciences. He was influenced especially by the works of Bacon, Kepler, and Galileo. Both Bacon and Kepler visualized an order So this is the preference for geometry, and Hobbes was also hugely influenced by the science of geometry to grasp political and moral knowledge. He found it useful because of its clear deductive reasoning. He says that as long as one's premises are correct, one could arrive at the right conclusions. He described geometry as the only science which pleased God and was given to humankind. He was convinced that politics could be as precise as geometry, and he referred to the Leviathan as a demonstration of this. His second intellectual model was physical science, especially the one practiced by Galileo, whom he admired. Hobbes contended that the aim of all philosophy was to give a mechanical theory of the universe. In fact, we need to remember here one point, that mechanical materialism differed from Marxist materialism. A mechanical materialist perceives matter in the form of passivity. He finds matter as passive, where no change is stimulated from within. Rather, change is stimulated from the external environment. On the other hand, dialectical materialists regard matter as active, where change is occurring from within without much help from the environment. So this is the difference between mechanical materialist and dialectical materialist. The mechanistic conception implies that the whole was no more than sum total of the parts that comprised it. So the state was an aggregate, according to Hobbes, and not a compound of individuals. Now let's get back to Hobbes' theory of social contract, keeping in view the philosophical influences on his life of Galileo, Bacon, and other thinkers, and the events in his actual life. How Hobbes is telling us the story of social contract. His idea of human nature, like Machiavelli, is regarding secular origin of human conduct. He did not theorize about proper human behavior from an understanding of the idea of good. Unlike Aristotle and the medieval thinker, who saw human nature as innately social, Hobbes viewed human beings as isolated, egoistic, self-interested, and seeking society as a means to their end. Hobbes draws a gloomy picture of the state of nature, which is a natural corollary of his concept of human nature. He postulates that man is selfish by nature. Self-interest is the mainspring of human action. Hobbes believes that men are moved to action not by intellect or reason, but by their appetites, desires, and passions. In the absence of law and justice, the state of nature is characterized by a perpetual struggle, ceaseless conflict, and constant warfare. All individuals are fighting against each other. In his own words, the life of man in the state of nature is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short, wherein every man is enemy to every man. Every man is at war against every other man. In pursuance of his own pleasure, man wants power over others. But as the physical and mental powers of natural man are nearly alike, nobody is able to overpower the other. So all are equal in physical and mental power. almost equal. Hence, man is standing in natural fear of each other. It is a state of total insecurity. There is no room for industry. This is a state where might is right. And this is the order of the day. Men are free to take what they can and to rob whosoever they can. There is no law to prevent oppression or to contain the law of the jungle. It is a state of perfect anarchy. Hobbes is quite clear that he is not describing a historical fact, as we made it clear in the beginning, but he is trying to demonstrate what could happen, and what would happen if there were no settled government for any length of time. He is arguing that there can be no morality or consciousness of duty or obligation in the state of nature, because these are possible only after the establishment of law and government. Therefore, we have natural rights, which are nothing more than the natural powers of man, and these are used to oppress others. At best, natural liberty can be nothing but the liberty each man had to preserve his own life. So you have liberty only to preserve your life. You cannot exercise that liberty on others, because all are equal, almost equal in terms of mental and physical strength. So there is a self-preservation instinct. The urge for self-preservation is embodied in the law of nature, or natural law, which is conforming to the rules of prudence and expediency. Now there is existence of natural law, which prompts men to abandon the state of nature and to establish law and government. So natural law is motivating human being to come out of the state of nature. Natural law consists in the rules of self-preservation, and these are the rules which include that thing like everybody should aim at securing peace. Men should be willing to give up their natural rights. They should keep their contracts, and also they should show gratitude or return the things which they got from others. So the requirements of self-preservation itself created a sense of duty in the minds of men, which prompts them to found the state. Now, Hobbes is telling that at this level, man is going for contract, because the only way to attain it was the peaceful existence was through a covenant leading to the establishment of state. At this level, all the individuals are surrendering all their powers through a contract to a third party, who is not a party to the contract, but nevertheless receiving all the powers that were surrendered. And individuals are united. Now, all the powers of the individuals are united in one person, when every person said to her. So each human being is declaring that I authorize and give up my right of governing myself to this man, this assembly of men, on one condition, that you also give up your right and authorize all your action in like manner. So this is the contract. This is the language of contract. He is creating contract here. This is the common power coming into existence. So this is the birth of Leviathan, a sea monster, who is not a party to the contract. This is Hobbes' theory of social contract.